Hi, and welcome to the Dr. Z and J.W podcast. I'm J.W. Stewart, a veteran broadcaster and journalist with nearly 30 years experience. I've worked at ESPN and NBC, and now I teach at the University of New Haven.
And I'm Sheahon Zenger, Director of Athletics at the University of New Haven, previously the same position at the University of Kansas and Illinois State University. Prior to that, I spent many years in athletic administration and just as many years coaching college football. Welcome to the Dr. Z and J.W podcast.
And hi again, everybody, and welcome back to the Dr. Z and J.W podcast. As always, we appreciate you joining us here across all of our social media platforms. And we're always available on iTunes, Spotify, and Google Play. Our guest today is Jim Marchiony, who spent his entire career in athletics administration. He's done just about everything. He's worked at Kansas, he's worked at UConn, the NCAA, the college football playoffs, Georgetown, and Iona. He's got a lot of great stories. And Dr. Z, I know Jim is someone who's very special in your life.
Yeah, Jim is one of my favorite people that I've worked with in my time, and we spent about 8 to 10 years together, and stay in constant contact even to this day, just telling stories and keeping up on people. But you just described his career right there. This is a guy, I've kind of kept him in the bank here. Looking forward to bringing him on for our viewers as we go inside, outside, in UNH, outside UNH, just to kind of keep our viewers interested. But Jim's one of those guys that's had so many experiences that we could do a 3-hour podcast and tell stories about the origin of the NCAA tournament that he was a part of. And he just culminated his career with being called out of retirement to be the communications director for the CFP, the championship football game this last year. And those two brackets on the end of the career are pretty amazing. With all the schools you just named, I just thought for where we're located, our viewers would just enjoy hearing a guy who's been at all those different places and played tennis at St. Bonaventure to top it off.
Yep. This is a guy who's, as we mentioned, done just about everything. So I think that means to our viewers and our listeners, there's something in here for just about everybody, because he's hit so many different Power 5 schools. He's hit some mid-major schools. He's been, NCAA March Madness, college football playoffs, absolutely. I had a chance to chat with him. This was my first time meeting him. We get a chance to talk with our guests backstage before we start recording our podcast here. And Jim's great. I mean, he is, my first impression of him, he's a really nice guy. I mean, he grew up in Westchester County, not too far away from where I went to school at Marist College. And, he worked at Iona. So there's a little bit of a connection there. We have some friends in the media in common, which was nice to see. And as you said, he's a great storyteller. So I think today is going to be a great day for that as we record this podcast on August 20th, 2020. So August 20th, 2020, what are we doing on campus today, Dr. Z? How are things going as we get ready? We're a couple of days away from starting the 2020-2021 academic year.
I love the fact what you just brought up. I've probably got enough OCD that I love looking at numbers like that. Mm-hmm. It's 2020, that's going to happen once a month, right? On the 20th, just like when you watch your odometer, when it rolls through and it's 77,000 miles, 777. Those are like big moments for you. Something about it. The universe is all, trained to feel good. What's going on today is more and more students are showing up as our first day of class is Monday. And near as I can tell, these young people are wearing their masks and staying socially distanced and being responsible. And, I'd expect nothing less from the students at UNH, as we've talked about over time, the type of kids we have here, or young people we have here. They're grateful, they're generous, they're polite, they're hardworking overachievers. And I think that's who we get collectively, faculty, staff, everybody here. We call it the place of first opportunities and second chances. And I just love seeing them get back on campus.
Yeah, we know they love being back on campus, especially those who are returning to our campus, the returning sophomores and juniors and seniors, because, of course, our campus, like every other campus back in March, was closed. Everyone's got to go back home and make that transition. I've often thought about this, Dr. Z. I have a lot of respect for our students to begin with, and our student athletes. I have even more respect for what they had to deal with last year. I don't know. I was talking about this with my friends from college. I don't know what we would have done in the late 80s and early 90s if this happened to us back then, how we would have adjusted technology-wise. We just didn't have the technology. And we would have been faxing in our finals to our professors and hope they got there.
Absolutely. I don't know that we could have done it in any form or fashion. Having, we talk about this a lot, 3 college-age children. I've watched it firsthand. And I've watched the emotion of being sent home and having to do what you just described and being able to go back. So I know the enthusiasm with which these young people are coming to campus. And it's on them. It's on them to make it to Thanksgiving by doing the right things. That goes for my kids. That goes for these young people. But one of the last Zoom calls we had in May with the student athletes was me congratulating them and encouraging them to continue to be leaders in this situation. We've asked a lot of this generation. On the one hand, you hear a lot of people talking about the trophy generation and this and that. On the other hand, we've asked a lot. This is the generation of, I say tongue-in-cheek, car seats, bike helmets, September 11th, it's the thou shalt not generation. We've told them no to everything since they were yay big, and they've dealt with it. And I just have faith that each generation, I wouldn't be an educator if I didn't believe this. We challenge them to be the best they can be, and they're rising to that occasion. I refuse to take a negative outlook. Or I wouldn't be this.
Yep. And I think the students and our student athletes are the same way. I think they have a positive outlook. That's why they're here, especially the ones who've never been on our campus before, either transfer students or students coming right out of high school. And that's a huge transition in your life, regardless of what's going on in the world.
That's
and then you throw in one, on top of it, the pandemic and restrictions. I can imagine. I can't even imagine. It's the weight that some of these young men and women feel on their shoulders. But that's up to us and other people on our campus, to help alleviate that. Let them know everything's going to be okay, and everything will be okay. So long as people follow the guidelines that have been put out there. You mentioned leadership, and we've talked about this quite a bit on our show. There's a lot of different types of leaders, and you need the rah-rah leaders. But this is a situation, Dr. Z, that calls for people to lead by example. Would you agree?
Absolutely, and I think it's going to bring out. I was just having a conversation with one of our key vice presidents on campus about that, and not just student athletes or students, but certain staff who have really risen to the occasion and stepped up as leaders and taken on more responsibility. And he and I were talking about rewarding them in certain ways. And that's, you can take anything and turn it into a silver lining, and that's one way we're trying to do it with folks that are part of the charter community. It's showing who the stars are, and let's take care of that.
A lot going on our campus as always, especially with the beginning of the school year. A lot going on as we look forward to the first weekend in October with the Centennial Ball, which is going to be virtual this year. First time we've ever had the opportunity to do that. It'll be that first weekend of October 1, 2, and 3. We want to encourage all of our alums to register, and the prices are very reasonable, just $25 per person. It promises to be a memorable evening of student showcases, live entertainment, a live auction. More details to come here on the Dr. Z and J.W. podcast, and also on our newhaven.edu website. Your support through the Centennial Ball will help get us closer to meeting and hopefully even succeeding our ambitious $120 million Charger Challenge goal, which is part of the overall campaign for the University of New Haven. For more information or how to register, just go to newhaven.edu/alumni. So Dr. Z, as I mentioned, our guest today is Jim Marchiony. I'm going to let you do the honors to bring him out he's been waiting patiently in the green room. This is someone you've known for a long time. So Dr. Z, I turn it over to you for the intros.
Well, you already gave a little bit of his bio, and I'll do a thumbnail sketch, but more importantly, he's probably the first guest we've had outside of UNH who actually watches these podcasts. So when I called to ask him if he'd do this, he's gotten to know you and Broccoli Rob, and he knows John from the past, and this is going to be really fun. But I just introduced Jim as someone who's seen it from A to Z, from all these locales we've talked about, from the roles he's had at all these different universities and within the NCAA and the CFP. So, Jim, come out of the green room there, where I'm sure we provided some unbelievable snacks down in Dallas, Texas for you.
I'm full. Yeah, it's been great.
Yeah. Just like the Letterman show.
Yeah. It's great to be here. It is great to be here. It's good to see you guys.
Yeah. I'll let J.W. I call him the point guard of the show. I out here and shoot jump shots. I kind of cherry pick. So great interviewer, and I'll let him ask the anchorman type questions, and I'll add in the left hooks when necessary.
That's good. I'm ready.
Well, Jim, it's great to have you on the podcast. We appreciate you watching and listening. We've been doing this since April. It means a lot that you've joined us. First of all, how you doing?
I'm doing great. I retired a year ago after 43 years in college athletics, and the retirement lasted about 2 months, as I think Sheahon referred to. The college football playoff, which has their office is down here in Dallas, called and asked if I'd kind of help out with their media relations because their communications person had left rather suddenly. So after 2 months of retirement, I spent 4 months at the college football playoff through the end of January. Actually, the game was in the middle of January. So now, since I've done one small project for them as well. But other than that, I've been retired and just keeping up with what's going on in college athletics and what's going on at University of New Haven.
Well, we appreciate that. What do you think of the podcast? And be honest, don't pull any punches on us, because we can take it.
Well, it's funny. I like the podcast a lot. I think it's funny, and Sheahon and I talked about this at the beginning of when you started doing it, that Sheahon wasn't a podcast guy in our previous life, and so I think it's great that he's doing this. And what I like about it is it ties in athletics with the rest of the university, and that I know is very high on Sheahon's list of things that must do's in college, and so that's what I've been impressed with the podcast.
It's interesting you say that. I'll give a sneak peek into next week. We've kind of been holding another star player in the bank as well, and that's Mario Gabri, our provost. And, you wouldn't anticipate that an athletics podcast would have the provost of the university on. And we'll describe at that time what a provost is. It's your academic officer. But that it gives me great pride to be able to use athletics as a front porch to the whole institution. And that's what Jim and I did so much of for the last 8 to 10 years. It's important to both of us. And so he's getting to see it play out in a bigger way, because, as I said before, I was allergic to social media prior to now, and I'm still not a big fan of Twitter because you can't communicate and show facial expressions and body language and voice tone, and you can so easily be misinterpreted through other forms of social media.
Jim, you have a background in media relations. Give us an idea. Dr. Z knows you so well. Our executive producer, John Mays, knows you so well. For our audience who's just getting to know you, and I think, as Z said before, you have a story that's probably going to satisfy every member of our audience. Give us an idea of your background and how you became interested in media relations and your role there, as you mentioned, 40 plus years doing it.
Well, it's funny. I did not intend to go into media relations. I was standing on line in graduation, and this is a lesson for students. And the young lady in front of me, alphabetically, we did it alphabetically at St. Bonaventure. We were small enough to be able to do that. She turned around to me and said, Iona's looking for somebody in media relations or whatever, communications. And I grew up and lived 20 minutes from Iona. And so my only other interview was going to be as sports editor of the Ossining Citizen Register, which is a Gannett newspaper, at least was, I don't know if they still exist, but in Ossining, New York, in Westchester County. So I went home, drove home with my parents the next day, and the next day I drove my resume over to Iona and met the guy who was doing the interviewing, and we sat down and talked, and then I went to the newspaper interview, and ended up 2 days later with 2 job offers. And there were 2 things that swayed me. One was that I wasn't really confident in my ability to lay out a page. I knew I could write, but I didn't know if I could lay out a page. And the other one was that the newspaper offered, I think it was $7,800 a year, and Iona offered me like $9,000 a year. So I went with the big money, and that's how I got into it. And I hadn't given it a thought. I helped out as a student. I helped out in the sports information office at St. Bonaventure, which was a fortunate thing. It turned out to be another lesson for the students is the guy at Iona, after we interviewed, called the guy at St. Bonaventure and asked about me. And fortunately, the guy at St. Bonaventure said, if I had the money, I'd hire him. And that's all, as an employer, that's what you want to hear as a recommendation. And so when I was in Kansas, I used to talk to student classes all the time, and I would tell them, even as a student, take advantage of your opportunity to meet people, and just know that you have no idea who the person that you meet is who's going to help you get a job 3 years from now, and act accordingly, and be responsible and all that, because you never know who's going to be able to help you get that first job.
Well, that's an amazing lesson, both those, and I have a friend in the business, a headhunter, who for younger guys and gals who want to be athletic directors will often on their resume list all these national people they've met at a convention or something. And he'll kind of play a trick on them. Now, well, what's the AD at your school going to say about you? Oh, you mean where I work, where I actually, yeah, the people you actually work with, not the people that you go, have a cup of coffee with in the hallway at some convention. So as we're listening to Jim, J.W. says, I got to point this out. One of the things I'd loved about working with him and some of our other colleagues who are from the New England and New York areas, as he talks about St. Bonaventure and Iona and Westchester County, and you talked about Georgetown and Yukon and these other places he's been, those seemed like magical places to me, being a Midwesterner, the land of the big state schools and so on and so forth. And when I was at Illinois State, we'd play in the Bracket Buster, and we played Niagara one year, which is akin to Iona. And you've got Siena. And so these friends of mine, especially Jim, would always talk about all these places. And it seemed like I was in they were in the Chronicles of Narnia or something. And now I live here. And Jim and I were just talking about Fairfield the last time we were talking. And there was a reason to talk about that. And I now live within a stone's throw of Fairfield and know what it is. And I know to our viewers who are from here or have moved away from here, that's not a big deal. But to me, it's a part of the country that I'd only visited and never dreamt I'd live here and be a part of this kind of a magical world.
Yes, and Niagara is one of St. Bonaventure's biggest rivals. Back in the day when Bob Lanier played for St. Bonaventure and Calvin Murphy was at Niagara, and Canisius was the other part of that triangle, and just great schools, and I loved it. I just loved it. It was the perfect. St. Bonaventure was the perfect size for what I wanted. I wanted to go to a smaller school. I loved it.
People watching this, I've had the ability to be at multiple Final Fours and sit courtside and so on and so forth. One of the best in-game experiences I've ever had was when Illinois State played at Niagara. Small gym with this seating on one end is where all their students were, and they had this guy who dressed up like an eagle with his shirt off and led all the cheers, and on the other end was the band, and in between you just got blasted from both sides, and we went in there the favored team and just wilted. And needed that part. These schools, each school, St. Bonaventure has its piece. We've got, our football field that I know that some people refer to as the jungle, when it's packed. And they're just really neat things at these schools like New Haven and St. Bonaventure and Niagara and Canisius.
Well, and you mentioned Fairfield before. They've got, when they get their gym going, that's a great place to be too.
Yeah.
Just great schools.
Yeah.
Iona and Fairfield and Marist, Siena, and Canisius, Niagara, they're all in the Metro Atlantic Athletic Conference, and Iona has a proud history of basketball tradition, much the way St. Bonaventure does and Niagara does as well. Coaching Iona when they're back on the court, would be Rick Pitino, but they've had Jeff Ruland. And Jim, when you were there, for our audience, I think everyone knows this name. Who was the coach of Iona basketball when you were there for your first job out of college?
I was literally, I started two weeks after I graduated from St. Bonaventure. I started at Iona, and the head basketball coach at Iona was Jim Valvano.
Wow.
And I wasn't, I didn't turn 22 until the next month. So here I am, this quiet, kid from St. Bonaventure, and I often say that I learned to talk listening to the coaching staff at Iona.
You probably learned some words you probably can't say on this podcast.
Yeah, those were just. I was there for 3 years, and just terrific years. And he led Iona to the NCAA tournament in the third year. They had never been, and you mentioned Jeff Ruland and a bunch of players from Long Island, Glenn Vickers and Kevin Hamilton, and just it was just, the NCAA tournament was just, something that seemed so far out of reach, and then all of a sudden you're down in Raleigh, North Carolina, playing in the first round. It was terrific, just because you felt like it was small enough that you felt like you were part of building something. Even though Jim Valvano was doing all the building, but you felt that you were part of it because that's the way he was, and it's 3 years I'll never forget.
Again, I'm pointing out to the viewers that's what I mean by folks who are from this part of the world. It's the names, the flavor that comes out of this, the characters. It's those of you who've grown up around here or worked here, you can't help but run into the Valvanos of the world, or some friends of mine who were close to Bill Parcells, or whomever it is. It's like those names just fall off your lips that I've just seen on TV, and in later years got to know some of them decently well, but it's almost like you guys all grew up around it. And
the thing about Jim and I'll say it about Sheahon too is that Jim could talk about any subject, and he wasn't just a basketball coach in that regard. He was an English major at Rutgers, and you could tell, and that's that. Part of the fun was being able to listen to him talk about everything from basketball to English literature, and intelligently and funny. Just so funny about anything.
That kind of explains his ability to do the public speaking, and we continue to watch it every year on the anniversary of his speech, and ESPN focuses on it, and so on and so forth. Jim, I can't help, and I might be taking J.W's role here, but as you talk about going down to Raleigh for that NCAA tournament, in my mind, that's where Valvano ended up being. in the illustrious part of his career. At the same time, you've spent in your time at the NCAA, remind us how many years that was, and it was located in Kansas City at the time, and your role with the NCAA tournament. I always enjoyed your stories of how many you were front and center in that. And then when you were at the UConns and the Kansases of the world, you'd be back in a different capacity. But you've probably been to as many NCAA tournaments, Final Fours as anyone I know.
Well, I from Iona went to Georgetown University, and that's when, a year after I got there, they recruited Patrick Ewing and a bunch of other great players, and so that was, I've been riding people's coattails for my entire career. I started with Valvano, and then John Thompson and Patrick Ewing, and that's when the Big East started playing 3 months after I got to Georgetown. So that 30 for 30 that ESPN shows about the Big East is just a fabulous show, and it's dead on. And but then I went after about 5 or 6 years at Georgetown, went to the NCAA, and at the NCAA I was the media contact at the NCAA, but I was also in charge of television production. And back then, people can't imagine, people growing up now and going to college and can't imagine this, but back then CBS didn't do the entire tournament. CBS did one first round game at 11:30 p.m. Eastern on Thursday night and one first round game on Friday night at 11:30 p.m. Eastern. That was it. NCAA Productions produced every other game in the first round, not only produced the games, but syndicated them to markets of interest around the country, so that if Kansas was playing Rhode Island, for example, we would sell that game to TV stations in Rhode Island and in Kansas. And so that was a big part of my job back then, was to produce those games. And in fact, ESPN was good enough to let me go up there for the first 2 days of the tournament, so that I could see all the games at once and be able to easily contact the producers and directors and whoever I needed to talk to at the individual sites. And each year, I did that for 5 or 6 years before CBS then took over the whole tournament, and that was the end of that. But one of the most fulfilling moments of my professional career was every year on that first round Thursday at noon Eastern time, I would sit in front of monitors, and everybody would be where they're supposed to be. And 6 days earlier, that none of them had any idea where they were going to be, and that was thrilling to me to be able to be a part of that.
Wow, this is when I was a kid, there was a history show I loved called, I think it was called I Was There, or You Were There. Jim, you if you were to write a biography, or someone write a biography about you, it'd be called I Was There. That there's certain individuals that you don't know their names because they weren't the head coach or the prominent headliner, but always there in the background. And heck, I'd forgotten the stories for a moment about Georgetown. You go from Valvano to John Thompson and Patrick Ewing. I mean, just in the early part of your career. And, you finished it with, Jim Calhoun and Bill Self. And I mean, right there, you got 4 of the legends of college basketball, that just to name 4 that you bumped into.
Well, to go from Jim Valvano, who was one type of coach, to John Thompson, who was totally different type of coach, and handled his program differently than Jim did, and that was an education in itself. I owe everything to all those folks who were there when I was growing up, literally growing up. I mean, as a young adult, just wide-eyed. And I remember that my first year at Georgetown, we were playing Maryland, and Lefty Driesell was the coach at Maryland, and he and John did not get along, and I was on the scores table as the SID, and all of a sudden the two of them were right in front of me, screaming at each other, and I thought, oh my God, this is. But I learned so much from all of these coaches and administrators that I worked with. And at the NCAA, I went to the NCAA after Georgetown, and Walter Byers was the executive director.
Oh.
He built the NCAA,
yeah,
and really was one of the reasons why I went there.
Yeah.
So it's been a learning experience the whole time.
I think that's a story too. Maybe more interesting to me being a Midwesterner than others, but I can't imagine our viewers wouldn't be interested in. You were at NCAA for a number of years in Kansas City, great place to live, by the way, and it moved to Indianapolis, great place to live, and you chose at that point side. No, right? Wasn't that when you broke from them?
No. I agree about Kansas City, by the way, but and it was a tough move. I was there for a total of 18 years, and the first 14 or 15 were in Kansas City.
Okay.
And we did move to Indianapolis, and that was painful. Our son was going into 8th grade when we moved, and he was a very good soccer player. He was on a tremendous soccer team in Kansas. He was a goalkeeper there, and I felt like I was ripping. I had never moved as a kid. I lived in Westchester my whole upbringing, and so I had never had to move as a kid. And here I was uprooting him. It was awful. It worked out fine, but it was tough. And then I was in Indianapolis for 3 years with the NCAA before I went to UConn.
Okay.
So, Jim, we all have our favorite March Madness memories. What are yours? You mentioned the stuff about ESPN, and we appreciate you giving us the kind of, this is what it was like behind the scenes as we pull back the curtain. How about some of the stuff that you saw in person, Final Fours, national championship games, early round games? What stands out to you in terms of March Madness when you think about that?
Well, I think one of them was what I described about when NCAA Productions was producing the games and just being there in the first round where everybody was where they're supposed to be. And I never went to a first round site because I was at ESPN. So that was very, very rewarding. I'd have to say that my first experience at the NCAA was at Iona, and I thought, it doesn't get any better than this. Of course, the national championship at KU was something that was terrific to be a part of, and I just think that sometimes you can take for granted if you go every year, and I'm talking about a program now. I'm talking about as you go, all the elite basketball programs you go every year. It's easy to forget how much that means to the student athletes who don't get to go every year. I remember distinctly, I think of the year it was 2000 or 2002 when St. Bonaventure went for the first time in a while, and just how much it meant to the school and the students there and to the program. It's easy to forget that when you go every year, and it's it's the same in every division. it's not just the Division I level. It's Division II and Division III. It's the you know, the elite, whether it's the Elite Eight or whatever they do. In every sport, it is really rewarding. I think probably I think that's the feeling that I felt the most working at the NCAA, was rewarding when you saw how much it meant to the players and the coaches and the fans and the wives, it's something that's hard to describe unless you're part of it. And so I think that's what I took away most from my experiences with the NCAA tournament.
Everyone's looking for that one shining moment, right? Just like the song that we all hear at the end of the telecast, correct?
Yeah, and you know, schools are, you know, well, are we going to be in there? Are we going to be in the one shining moment video? And what a thrill it is for some schools even to be included in that montage at the end of the tournament. It really is hard to describe how much it means to everybody involved, and so you know, that's part of why it was so tough this past year when it didn't happen. And so I would say that's the overriding emotion that I have when you talk about being involved in the NCAA tournament, and what NCAA Productions did other sports as well. We produced the lacrosse championship, for example, and other, we did softball before ESPN really caught on to softball, and we did volleyball before ESPN realized what a great sport that is to televise, and what it means to those participants to be involved in the NCAA tournament is something that, and it's true at all levels, Division I, II, and III. It's just the highlight of most of these kids' careers is to be on that court with the NCAA logo on there, no matter what sport it is.
So Jim, all those years of basketball tournaments and the dance and so on and so forth, and then this last year, you are thrown into the middle of, because of a need they had at the CFP office, of, you know, the communications piece of the CFP, the championship game in football. And you've been a part of bowl games and things like that over the years, but I don't know if you could compare and contrast the football championship game with an NCAA basketball championship game, or just what was that experience like? And what was it like after all your other experiences? Did it meet expectations, exceed them? What, you know, it's something that, well, I was right there in the same city with you for a whole nother reason. I ended up going to a friend's house and with a bunch of other ADs and watched it on TV rather than fight the crowds, because we'd had our meetings earlier today and the day before. And people won't believe that. But, you know, I'm looking at the stadium right out the hotel window. I think we're in the same one. And, you know, a bunch of us elected to go somewhere else and have pizza, which doesn't compare to the pizza here, but, you know, comment.
I was excited to be part of the CFP because I had not been to not that I can remember, been to a major bowl game, and so this was the game, and I actually a couple of weeks before had gone to the Sugar Bowl because it was played in the same dome that the championship game was going to be played in. So that was the first, beside the orange, I should say, at Kansas we made the Orange Bowl in 2000, at the 2008 Orange Bowl. So I had experienced that, but this was the first time being on the other side of it, and it's very similar in terms of all the organization that has to happen, and in fact, Bill Hancock, who runs the college football playoff, used to run the Final Four, so he brought a lot of things with him to the college football playoff, and so organizationally, it's very similar. It's huge, though. The college football playoff, just for one game, is start with the size of the traveling parties. When LSU and Clemson rolled in with 7 huge buses each, and it's hard to describe how big it is. I've never been to the Super Bowl, but you go into media day for the college football playoff was probably fairly similar to that of the Super Bowl, and I just think I go back to what it means to the people involved, and even at that level, you can see, those teams had been there before in terms of huge games, and but they weren't taking any of that for granted. I mean, it was interesting to see that. But it's just it's just very gratifying, very fulfilling to be a part of something that big and that successful, and it went off great, and who knew, 2 months later we'd all be sitting by ourselves trying to stay safe.
Yeah.
Jim, you've been in the business a long time. We said more than 40 years. You've done it all. How has your profession changed in those 40 years? What changes have you seen, especially on the technology front?
Yeah, I think technology would have been the first word I would use. When I started, back in I'll say 1976, to send something to the newspaper, you'd have to stick it at one page at a time in a machine, and it would take 4 minutes to go to send one page to the newspaper. And then when the newspaper got it on their machine, they'd have to take it out of the machine and retype whatever we had sent them. So and if it didn't work on 4 minutes, you had to send it on a 6 minute level. So it would take 6 minutes for a page. So now, communication is instantaneous, and I used to mail, even at Georgetown, I used to mail releases to Sunday night. Used to mail releases about Georgetown's team to writers around the country, and literally stick them in the envelope and bring them to the post office. And now you just type it up and hit the button, and it goes to however many people you want to send it to. So I think that from a sports information media relations standpoint, that's one big change. The other big technological change, I think, is social media. And it's good and it's terrible. And it has given everybody, every individual, whether you're a coach or an administrator or a student athlete, it's given everybody a voice, your own voice, which again can be good and bad. And then you have to deal with the repercussions of that. And I remember as an administrator, being very fearful of Twitter when I found out exactly what Twitter was, because information is so easily transmitted now, and it's transmitted to people that you may not want it to be to receive it. So I think social media has been maybe the biggest change that we've seen technologically, and I think, as I said, it can be a great thing, and it can be your worst enemy. And that's, I'm sure that's a challenge for media relations professionals, whether it be in college or even in the pros, but certainly in college, when you're dealing with 18 to 22-year-olds who are probably more apt to hit the send button than some of us old people are.
I want to go back to the old days. I like that 4-minute, 6-minute. Heck, Pony Express wasn't all that bad, you know?
Yeah, but you know, it is terrific to be able to communicate so easily now.
Yeah.
And sometimes it saves you. But again, there's positives and negatives to the whole thing. But I think the technology, and specifically the social media, and I think also the proliferation of media outlets. You know, when I first started at the NCAA, well, you didn't know what a website was, but certainly they didn't have websites back then. But as websites started to develop, they weren't given media credentials, and that changed, you know, as you know, the 2000, 2001, 2002, you know, 1999, somewhere in there, when websites really began to proliferate and to be a lot of people's source of news and sports, and so that is also a big change, because all of those sites want access to your coaches and players, and they want one-on-one access to your coaches and players. So that's tough to manage.
You know, you talk about, you know, without technology as it is now, but, you know, I couldn't have sent you a picture in preparation for this podcast last night of the Zupadapesh Bowl that I had, you know, Michael Anthony's last night, you know,
that looked good. Even on a text, that looked good.
Oh, that was unbelievable. You know, these guys know I'm a little bit of a foodie, but my favorite dish I found that I didn't know existed before I came here was Zupadapesh. And I've only had it with, you know, the spicy clam sauce. So that's what I thought I was getting. Last night they brought it with the red sauce, which I could drink red sauce. That was extra special. And I think I was trying to say exchange this fish for that, and all they did was give me more of everything, you know. So I proceeded to make sure it was all consumed, and slept the sleep of the just last night.
I don't know how you could have slept after that, but you can. I know you can.
Yeah.
So Jim, you know Z better than most people. On this podcast, we've learned that he loves to eat, that he loves movies and TV shows and books, and he has like 5 or 6 pairs of cowboy boots that came out on a recent podcast.
I heard that.
Yeah. Give us your best Dr. Z story, please.
Well, it won't surprise you that it involves food. It's a story, and Sheahon will know it well. It's a story that involves me. It involves Sheahon, and it involves a guy named Max Falkenstein, who for 60 years was the voice of the radio voice of Kansas basketball and football for 60 years. The three of us went, after we've been putting it off and talking about it, we went to a ribs place about an hour south of Lawrence called Guy and May's. And you don't want to go to lunch with Sheahon when he's hungry. You don't want to go to dinner with him when he's hungry either. But you certainly don't want to go to lunch with Sheahon when he's hungry, because you're done for the rest of the day. And so we went to this place and Sheahon can probably embellish the story better than I can, but they just kept bringing slabs of ribs, and it was and then it became a contest, and then it got ugly, and I'll just leave it at that.
Well, and the best part of it's, you got to know Max, who passed away a year ago, month, and in his 90s, and he kept pace with us till the very end. Yeah, I mean, I've seen a 90-year-old that he was badgering us if we hadn't been to lunch that week. I mean, he made sure, and I couldn't always make it, but Jim and another guy or two would make it. But Max is one of those guys you just wanted to be around. He was full of life and made life better, and he liked to eat as well. And the first time Jim and I went to this place, he'd been bugging us for like 2 years about it. And we actually sandwiched it around a speaking event we had between Lawrence and Guy and Mays, and we went to this place, and I sandbagged a little, and because we had Max with us, I was the one that's supposed to speak. But come on, you got Max Falkenstein. This guy's an icon. I had him do most of the speaking, and lo and behold, at this building we were at, they had catered some pretty good barbecue. And I made up some excuse as to why we couldn't eat or whatever. They were almost hurt that we weren't eating, but, we got through it so that we could go to Guy and May. So the fact that I had to sit there and smell barbecue for an hour, and then go eat added to the whole thing. And by the way, they served the ribs wrapped in newspaper, just to give it a special
Right.
Best ribs I've ever had.
I don't think I had dinner that night. Let me just say that.
It seems like I texted you that night that you might have had like a cup of soup or something. I was a little disappointed in your performance that night.
Many good stories with Sheahon involve food.
Hey, it's breaking bread with your friends, right? Last night it was me and 6 or 7 Italian guys. It's a good thing I look Italian,
Right.
And some of these guys, we'll have some on the podcast. It's some of our former hockey and football players from here at UNH, along with Andre Dore, if you remember that name, J.W., NHL player for the Rangers and the Blues from this area, and the Nighthawks here locally. So I'll save that for a later podcast. But this is the kind of stuff Jim and I have done for the last decade. One food talk and one conversation with others we've done this many times.
So Jim was a college player, college tennis player at St. Bonaventure. So we'll let the serve and volley continue. Jim told a story about you, Z. Now it's time for you to volley back. Let's hear your best story about Jim.
Jim doesn't embarrass himself very often, so that it's hard to come up with that. But I have multiple memories of Jim was my, he was my security blanket and gifted at communications and when you're at a Power 5 school, you're constantly dealing with crisis. And so, the war room, we'd call it, his office. We'd all congregate in there when something came out, and there'd be 3 or 4 or 5 of us in there. Literally, it might be a 10-minute session. You might be in there for 4 hours, discussing how you're going to communicate and what you're going to communicate. And Jim was just always that calming influence. And, the part that, I don't know if his wife probably didn't appreciate it. My wife, threatened me all the time to stop doing it. But I'd wake up on Saturday and Sunday mornings, back when I read the newspaper. I stopped doing that years ago. And, I'm a younger AD at the time. You want to see what's in there. And there'd be something that slightly wasn't as positive as you wanted about the program. And I'd usually wait till 7 a.m. on Saturday or Sunday morning to call him. But he knew the call was coming. And I'd drive around and talk to him. And I probably repeated myself 10 times until Jim repeated himself 10 times, talking me off the ledge. And that, the first few years, we probably did that almost every Saturday and or Sunday morning. And finally, my wife kind of broke me of the habit, and it helped when I stopped reading the papers and so on and so forth. It's just the nature of what we do. But a lot of memories in the war room or on the phone on Saturday and Sunday mornings. And the final one that's even more fun is so often if we were going to a major event or a major meeting or something, Jim would always offer to go with me or ahead and if nothing else, just be in the crowd. You know, an example would be when the Big 12 was going through conference realignment, and the newspaper, the media outlets on both coasts were very negative about the Big 12 at the time, before, you know, we got really gained ground and people saw what we're making financially, and you know, certain teams were in the Final Four and certain football teams were in the Final Four, and now that table's kind of turned. But at one point I was sitting at a table with Bob Bowlesby in front of every media outlet in the country, and that's not something you expect to do when you start your career as a running back coach. And Jim, of course, would be right there beside me, and he was the guy giving me the conversation right before and the conversation right after, and you know, making sure that when I went to, you know, bed at night that I could actually sleep. That those are lots of memories in that way.
Yeah, lots of memories.
And he ate I made him eat a lot of different foods he probably didn't want to eat along the way.
I wanted to eat them. I just shouldn't have. But I will say this, J.W, that Sheahon is going to do great things at New Haven. In my time with him at Kansas, I think we don't talk about it too much. It doesn't get a lot of headlines and everything. One of the great things he did there was start I'll call it student services, because I can't remember what the real title was, but he brought a couple of people in from Illinois State and started a student services department that was really aimed to help student athletes. They weren't there to coach them. It was there to coach them in life and prepare them for life and help them psychologically and get, leadership wise, and get through you know, a Power 5 existence for 4 or 5 years. And you know, when I left Kansas, I told the folks, you know, that he brought in that they changed the department for the good. I mean, that changed Kansas athletics, and it's something that I wasn't part of that, but I worked with them, and it was, you know, you talk about something that worthwhile and fulfilling. That was it. You know, I'd put that near the top of the list at KU.
Yeah, I think when you cross the age of 50, you start looking in the mirror and wondering why you're on this earth and why you're in this business, and what can you do to give back. And I fundamentally believe that in my soul that I was put here to be a teacher and a coach and an educator. And when you get to a school like that where the budgets exceed, they become 7-digit figures, you know, or you have $100 million budget. What are you really doing other than signing contracts and doing this and that and playing to the media? And it has to be about more than that. It's about the student athlete. It's not just about on the field of play. It's in the classroom and their personal lives. And yeah, Jim kind of tripped a trigger there for me. And I think people on this podcast know that. That's if I do nothing else on this earth, it's to help young people become the best version of themselves they can be. And thank you, Jim, for bringing that up. But, we're trying to do the same thing here. A little more limited resources, but I got a donor yesterday to step up and purchase the books that you're familiar with, the I Dare Yous and the Slide Edges and the Butterfly Effect. And I don't want the students at New Haven to go without those. So, and we just agreed to underwrite it.
Plus, they always had food in that department, so that's what made me think of it.
Yeah. They were pretty talented in that category as well.
I think that's the perfect way to end the interview, unless Dr. Z, you have any final questions for Jim before we let him go. Like, Jim, we thank you for your time. Is there anything that you want to add? Any parting words of wisdom?
No, I think we've covered most of it. It's been a real pleasure. I've enjoyed listening to these podcasts, and it makes my daily walk go a little quicker. And so I'll just say it again. I think you can. I'm excited that Dr. Z is at New Haven, and I think you're going to see some great things in the next few years.
We're lucky to have him, Jim, where we really are. You've taught him well, so we say thank you for that as well, Jim.
You did, yeah.
Well, Jim, when things get back to normal, hopefully sooner rather than later, we'd love to have you come up to campus, and maybe you can play on those beautiful tennis courts outside of Dr. Z's office.
I'm definitely going to come up there when we get the go ahead. My family, I've still got family near there, and my best friend in college he doesn't live there anymore. My best friend in college is from Derby, which I don't think is too far from you.
Yeah, it's got a restaurant that I'm heading to this weekend.
Is that right?
Yeah.
See, it always comes back to food, doesn't it, Jim? It always comes back.
You asked me for a story. It had to include food.
I'd be disappointed if it didn't.
We're not letting my wife watch this episode. She thinks I'm a little too into that category. But, that's why I exercise,
That's right. That's right. Well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
We appreciate you, Jim. Thanks for the time, being most gracious, and we wish you the best of luck in retirement, and enjoy those grandkids, okay?
Yeah, thank you. I am.
Very good. Jim Marchiony, a friend of the Dr. Z and J.W. podcast, and a longtime friend of Dr. Z and our executive producer, John Mays. He's done everything in his athletic career. It was great to have him on the show. Before we wrap up, I just want to remind our audience, especially the alums in our audience, about the upcoming Centennial Ball, which will be held virtually this year on Saturday, October the 3rd. We want to encourage all of our alumni to register. Price, very reasonable this year, $25 per person. That price will get you access to a memorable evening of student showcases, live entertainment, live auction. And most importantly, your support through that $25 will go to helping us meet or even succeed our lofty goal of raising $120 million. That's our Charge or Challenge goal, which is part of the overall larger part of the campaign for the University of New Haven. So for more information on the Centennial Ball or for how to register, just go to the website newhaven.edu/alumni. Dr. Z, I've heard you mention Jim many times. John's mentioned Jim before many times, and he comes as advertised. He is a great man, and he's not only helped you quite a bit, but it sounds like he's helped student athletes wherever he's been, whether it's Patrick Ewing at Georgetown or anybody he worked with at Kansas or UConn or Iona or any place in between.
Well, I think we just scratched the surface of Jim's stories, and really the beauty of it is they come out spontaneously when you're together traveling and doing different things. But it was a treat for me to share him with everyone. I hope everyone enjoyed it as much as I did. And, I'd wrap my section up of this by saying this is what our business is all about. It's relationships. And being able to maintain those relationships over your lifetime. And there's certain people you stay in touch with more than others, and Jim's one of those that you stay in touch with more than others. And that's been a real treasure in my life and my career to be considered his friend.
Have you ever played tennis against him?
No, and I won't. That's a whole nother story. My high school football coach made me play tennis in high school, that's an infamous story that we won't go there. I ended up being a decent player. It didn't start out so good, but we'll see. I don't go near courts with real players.
We'll save that story for another time.
Yeah.
For Jim Marchiony and for our executive producer, John Mays, for producer Broccoli Rob Thompson, for Dr. Z, I'm J.W, reminding all of our alumni to register for that Centennial Ball at newhaven.edu/alumni. Thanks for joining us here on the Dr. Z and J.W podcast. We'll see you next time.